proud, Afrocentric, revolutionary,
Let it ring by any means necessary.
loud, egotistical, misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic, conspiracy theorists, cult leaders. These are some of the accusations critics have lodged against the phenomenon of the Hotep. But what exactly is a Hotep?
We used to say Hotep to each other.
Hotep,
and like
that's a greeting.
The genuine greeting.
Good evening, and Hotep.
The term Hotep is an Egyptian word meaning be at peace. It has been used as a greeting in Afrocentric circles in the United States since the 1970s. How the term evolved from representing the Black liberation movement to being associated with cultural con men and spiritual pimps is a story that goes back over 100 years. In the early 20th century, after years of isolated protests and revolts,
No more chopping cotton! No! Just sitting in the sun!
indigenous Africans and displaced people of African descent started a political movement to officially unite in solidarity against the establishments of colonialism and slavery in the diaspora. It was called the Pan-African Movement. International leaders in support of the movement would meet to discuss strategies for uniting all people of African descent under a common history and presumed destiny. But the movement didn't take a foothold in the United States until the arrival of one man who many so-called Hoteps modeled themselves after. Marcus Mosiah Garvey Jr. paraded through the streets of New York in 1920, dressed in a British military uniform, flanked by thousands of onlookers and his own personal militia. Garvey was a Pan-African delegate from Jamaica who brought his organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, to America in 1916.
We of the Universal Negro Improvement Association are raising the cry of Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad.
After gaining a sizable following from his writings and lectures promoting racial pride in the era of Jim Crow, Garvey appointed himself Provisional President of Africa and started his version of the Back to Africa movement that allowed Black Americans to migrate to the continent under his governance. He also created the flag most people associate with Pan-Africanism. The colors of his flag have since been incorporated into many flags of African nations. Some Black people were not happy with Garvey's approach, however. His loudest opponent was fellow Pan-Africanist and NAACP founding member W.E.B. Du Bois. The National Association of the Advancement of Colored People is a civil rights organization started in 1909 and focused on social and political reform to improve the quality of life for Black Americans. The NAACP is also a racially integrated organization, in contrast to Garvey's race-first policy. Personally, Du Bois viewed Garvey as an egomaniac whose rhetoric didn't amount to real change in the community. Some African nationals also criticized Garvey for trying to impose his utopian image of Africa onto existing nations based on ideals rooted in Western culture, most notably his love of capitalism. Garvey circulated wealth in the Black community through numerous business ventures paid for by his followers. He believed that collective economics, not rugged individualism, would allow African Americans to become self-sufficient on their path to true independence. The UNIA pulled donations and investments from mostly working-class Black people. But his biggest venture, the Black Star Line, a trade shipping fleet connecting the African diaspora through commerce, would eventually lead to his downfall. In 1923, Garvey was convicted of fraud for selling stocks to a ship on the Black Star Line that he didn't own yet. Around that time, he was also facing backlash from Black Americans for aligning himself with white nationalist groups who echoed similar race-first beliefs. Within a few years, his Back to Africa movement was completely derailed. Sadly, Garvey died of a stroke in 1940. But the UNIA continued to prosper, and followers of his teachings, called Garveyites, preclude many of the supposed Hoteps of today. Although organizations like the NAACP continued to push for civil rights, Garvey left a void in the black community for leadership that could instill a sense of racial pride en masse. Religious groups used this opportunity to galvanize their congregations by adding messages of black empowerment to their teachings. Institutions like the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or AME Church, founded in 1816, were established in protest of and fought against racial discrimination. The AME Church even adopted the Pan-African colors into their official seal. But many people during Garvey's time started to reject mainline Christianity in search of beliefs more aligned with their African ancestry. This movement had been explored earlier in the diaspora through the practices of voodoo, hoodoo, and Santeria.
Between us what are here and us what are across the sea, a connection.
But now more belief systems tracing their lineage back to Africa were in demand. Religions like Ethiopianism, an offshoot of Christianity, depicting Africa as the biblical promised land, adopted by many Pan-Africanists on the continent and in the Caribbean in the early 1900s, and inspired the religion of Rastafarianism in the 1930s. The Black Hebrew Israelite movement, founded by Frank Cherry and William Saunders Crowley in the 1890s, grew rapidly with claims that Black Americans are the true descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, as opposed to the European Jews. The Moorish Science Temple, founded in 1913 by Noble Drew Ali, introduced Islam to many Black people for the first time, claiming that they descended from the ancient Moors of Moab, now modern-day Morocco. In 1930, the Nation of Islam, founded by Fard Muhammad and eventually led by Elijah Muhammad, pronounced that people of color were from the tribe of Shabazz that settled in the Nile Valley. Many of these religions incorporated similar elements from sources like Freemasonry, a secretive, ritualistic fraternal order. New Thought, the belief in the manifesting power of the mind. Extraterrestrialism, the proposition of life on other planets. And Egyptomania, the Western fetishization of ancient Egypt. And these religions are also where most of the apparent Hotep beliefs originated. Beliefs such as the black man is genetically superior to white people, preached by the Nation of Islam.
The person have a stale color and his bones are weak and they call him Caucasian.
And that black people are indigenous to America and were not brought here during the transatlantic slave trade, taught by many Moorish Americans.
This is a part of the dominion of Africa before the great earthquake which caused the great Atlantic Ocean.
The most popular belief that emerged out of these religious groups into secular communities was black people's version of Egyptomania. Ancient Egypt was romanticized as one of, if not the greatest civilization in human history, and because it is in the continent of Africa, it has been used as the hallmark of racial pride in almost every major black movement in America. While civil rights groups continued to lobby for fair and equal treatment under the law, the black religious groups prioritized social reform in the black community. It wasn't until the 1960s when these two efforts publicly intersected and spawned a more well-defined version of racial pride, called the Black Power movement. The Black Power movement overlapped with the Civil Rights movement that peaked during Dr. Martin Luther King's crusade for equal rights in the 50s and 60s.
Free at last! Thank God Almighty, we are free at last!
At the same time, Malcolm X, spokesman for the Nation of Islam, stood on the platform of black nationalism, a long-held belief that black Americans should be allowed to govern themselves independently from the rest of society.
Bring about the complete independence of people of African descent.
Both men were forefronted in the media during a time of heightened racial tension in America, exposing worldwide audiences to their political, social, and religious beliefs. While many people were familiar with King's ideologies, as a Christian minister continuing the work that organizations like the NAACP and the AME Church pioneered before him. This was the first time a global audience was exposed to alternate black religions like the Nation of Islam through Malcolm X and his precept of black nationalism, rooted in many of Marcus Garvey's teachings. Sadly, Malcolm X and Dr. King were both assassinated in 1965 and 1968, respectively. Prior to their murders, black radicals started combining Dr. King's mass mobilization strategies with Malcolm X's black nationalist concepts. This was the Black Power movement, made famous by activists like Kwame Ture and Angela Davis, and groups like the Black Panther Party, founded by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in 1966.
The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense is organized now throughout the nation. We are recognized internationally, and we advocate that all black people in America are taught what politics is all about and what our history is all about.
This movement grew so large, it crossed over into pop culture with cultural symbols like the afro and the black fist. Through Malcolm X's teachings, a new generation were exposed to the remnants of Garveyism, sparking a revival of Pan-Africanism, as well as a renewed interest in alternate black religions. Participants in the Black Power movement started to canonize a secular ideology that combined political concepts with religious beliefs from groups like the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, Rastafarianism, the Black Hebrew Israelites, and also the Yoruba tribes of West Africa. Religious practices, such as abstaining from pork and the ritualization of marijuana, were combined with Pan-African tenets like donning dashikis and adopting African surnames. This new ideology would eventually become what's known as Afrocentrism, the cultural revolution that created the baseline archetype of a Hotep.
We watched Dr. King on television when we were in high school, try to prove that America could be changed. Dr. King proved the inhumanity of America.
But there was still a considerable amount of racial strife in the country going into the 1970s. Black power groups like the Black Panthers were not satisfied with the Cultural Revolution and prepared for a violent revolution, like the ones they studied in Cuba and Algeria. The Panthers also stood on the platform that capitalism was the real source of black people suffering in this country, and fully embraced communism, even allying with communist nations engaged in a Cold War with the United States. This led to the aggressive dismantling of the Black Panthers by the FBI through a domestic counterintelligence program called COINTELPRO. Most of the prominent leaders in the Black Power movement were either assassinated, imprisoned, or fled the country. By the early 70s, almost all of the Black Power groups were wiped out or forced to operate in secret until they progressively dissolved. In the aftermath of the assassination of so many political leaders in such a short time, there was a debilitating void left in the black community for the guidance they received during the Black Power movement, as well as a justifiable fear of government persecution for engaging in radical politics. Therefore, many people coming out of the movement retreated back to the Cultural Revolution approach. This was the dawn of the Afrocentric movement, spearheaded by a wave of black thought leaders, as opposed to political leaders, who combined elements of Pan-Africanism, black nationalism, black religious teachings, and organizational strategies from Dr. King to the Nation of Islam to the Black Panthers. The most influential leader during this wave was Maulana Karenga, who founded the Pan-African organization US in 1965 and created the celebration of Kwanzaa in 1966.
Why is it important for black people to have a mythology? It is important because black people have to have, as everybody else, a starting point.
The US organization was in direct and violent confrontation with the Black Panthers over their radical approach to black nationalism. When the Panthers were disbanded, Karenga led the charge for a more socially acceptable version of the movement, which was legitimized by the larger society when Kwanzaa became an official American holiday. Karenga and other Afrocentric thought leaders spoke on college campuses in the 70s and 80s after the Black Power movement exposed the blatant misconstruing of African history in academia and mainstream media.
You're saying, I'm assuming, that history is being manipulated.
Because they had to justify the slave trade and they had to justify the colonial system that followed.
As colleges started diversifying their curricula to make up for this disparity, they began appointing these thought leaders as faculty to newly developed departments of African studies. Most of these thought leaders engaged in sound scholarship, but some theorized on the more unfounded claims of Afrocentrism and faced a higher level of academic scrutiny.
While still at Howard, I heard a rumor that I was going to be blocked from promotion and tenure because of my views, not because of my academic work.
They often leaned on some of the more attractive talking points of Afrocentrism to draw in audiences, like the renewed interest in ancient Egypt and the theory of black people's genetic superiority.
These people, the black, brown, red, and yellow people, were the majority people on the planet, and that they were genetically dominant to white-skinned people.
Black thought leaders published these Afrocentric beliefs and distributed them to the same audiences, creating a canon of Afrocentric ideology that was required reading for everyone in the movement. These books included The Browder Files by Anthony T. Browder, The ISIS Papers by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams, They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima, and Black Man of the Nile by Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen. Many of these books were criticized as pseudo-history or pseudoscience, but they remain to this day the primary source of Afrocentric beliefs. The canon of Afrocentrism grew rapidly, blending social, political, and spiritual ideologies. Self-sustaining Afrocentric communities were being built around this canon, successfully executing on the black nationalist strategies put forth by Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey before him. But as the canon of Afrocentricity continued to balloon and morph, some thought leaders used this as an opportunity to fabricate their own ideologies, to indoctrinate and ultimately exploit their insular communities. Leaders like Yahweh bin Yahweh and Malachi York, who blended all of these beliefs to create their own religions in the 1980s. Both of them amassed large congregations, land, property, and personal wealth, but were eventually outed as criminals and cult leaders. Ben Yahweh was convicted of RICO and conspiracy murder charges, and York was sentenced to 135 years in prison for over 100 counts of child molestation. In the 1990s, more leaders continued to confound all of these different Afrocentric beliefs, some out of a genuine attempt to enlighten black people, and some as a means to manipulate and exploit them. This also led to rampant misogyny in the movement, as nearly all of these leaders were men and exerted their control over one of their most vulnerable follower bases, the women. But the complete makeup of a Hotep wasn't formulated until the addition of one more source of information to the canon of Afrocentrism. As Afrocentric bookstores and street vendors responsible for circulating this written canon became cornerstones in the black community, they created a new market for revolutionary and alternate thought literature. To meet this growing demand, booksellers started adding other heavily scrutinized books to their inventory. Books like Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Daniken and The Truth Shall Set You Free by David Icke, and possibly the most influential book, Behold a Pale Horse by Milton William Cooper. In Cooper's book, he detailed some of the most popular conspiracy theories of the 20th century, from the existence of the Illuminati to UFOs to the New World Order. Since this book and others like it were put in circulation next to Afrocentric books, they were inadvertently added to the canon of Afrocentrism, despite being by prominently white authors and having no ties to any of the historic black movements. This development created a bridge between the Afrocentric community and the white supremacist groups who read the same books and believe the same conspiracy theories. Both communities had similar yet opposing beliefs about their race's genetic superiority and revisionist ancestry, but it was a mutual distrust in the government and world power structure that put some members in agreement with each other.
I don't
don't know what the hell the fight is about over the Confederate flag. We need to put the American flag down because we've cut as much hell under that as the Confederate flag.
Those from the Afrocentric community who accepted this extended canon as their personal identity, from Pan-Africanism to Black nationalism to Black alternative religions to conspiracy theories to sympathy for white supremacists, became what we now call a Hotep. But what separates a Hotep from someone who is simply Afrocentric is that by confounding all of these sources into an identity, especially the conspiracy theories, they often fully detach themselves from the larger society, living as a pariah. Hoteps continue the shameful trend of cherry-picking from and carelessly adding to the canon of Afrocentrism to indoctrinate disenfranchised Black people into a cult following they can easily exploit. This was widespread in the Afrocentric communities of the 90s and early 2000s. The pejorative Hotep didn't appear until the rest of the world got exposed to these individuals through the internet.
All right, family. All right, man, y'all already know what it is, man. This is it, man. Let me bring the brothers in the building. They are here.
The content era of the 2010s gave way to a flood of thought leaders divulging Afrocentric teachings to a brand new audience. Speakers like Hotep Jesus, Brother Polite, Sa Netta, Tariq Nasheed, Dr. Umar Johnson, and others saw this as a means to go viral and have lucrative careers as influencers. While many followers did agree with their talking points,
no words could express what I feel is because words is on the left side and feeling is on the right, and they didn't make a connection.
The larger society poked holes in their ideologies, credibility, and even their personal presentations. That's when the term Hotep was coined as a slur.
What do you think you are, some kind of Hotep Jesus?
Ooh,
that's
that was
good.
Just like, ooh, that's sexy.
And then came the memes. What started out as movements for civil rights and racial pride has turned into a clown show on social media. Many of these Hoteps are constantly being exposed as grifters, abusers, or worse. There is still a community of people upholding Afrocentric ideologies with dignity.
I would hope that people really get involved and really rethink the ways they're personally either adding to the solution or being a part of the problem.
But the lies, misinformation, and misappropriation that crept in over the years has allowed bad actors to corrupt and co-opt the movement for their own selfish gains. I can say this because I'm a child of the Afrocentric community. I was given an African name at birth and was raised in a tight-knit, self-contained community that made me feel separated from the larger society. All of those books, from the Browder Files to the ISIS Papers to Behold a Pale Horse, were required reading for me and my insular peer group. We ate holistic diets, chanted Ashe after every meaningful engagement, and ritualized marijuana use at an early age. But now as adults, most of us live with a steady amount of cognitive dissonance, never fully adjusted to the larger society, and struggle with our mental health or battles with addiction. We do, however, have strong morals and principles. When we enroll in formal education, we excel. We are an asset to our community, engaging the youth, empowering our peers, and caring for our elders. We know what it means to be unified in the most important cause of all, to be free. Freedom from oppression, self-hatred, self-degradation. But my hope is that we also find freedom in the truth. By reassessing the canon of Afrocentrism to parse out fact from fiction, myth from reality, and beliefs that may feel empowering, but actually render us powerless to better our lives and the lives of those in our community. And with that, brothers and sisters, I say Hotep. Peace.